For the second half of this week's lecture, we're going to look at a couple of the sociological perspectives and how they view issues related to the economy, and also take a look at the larger global implications of the economy and compare the two different kinds of the two primary types of economic systems that are in the world at this time. First, taking a look at a couple of our sociological perspectives. The functionalist perspective believes that the United States in its political life is ruled by many different groups, and so the interests of any one special interest group then is balanced out by the interests of the other groups. So thinking back to the last set of slides that we looked at, the last lecture, where we were talking about PACs and special interest groups affecting our legislators, functionalists would say this is just the competition between different groups and that no one group really gets the upper hand so much. Now, I would say that that's probably not that's certainly affected by how much money each of those special interest groups have as well. But a functionalist would see this not necessarily as a bad thing, but as a way that the society works. There is in their mind a check and balance between the branches of the government, as written in by the Constitution. The legislative branch makes the law. The judicial branch reviews the law to be sure it is constitutional. The executive branch can choose to accept and enforce or not the law. And if the executive branch, through the power of the veto, decides not to put into law something the legislature or the Congress passes, Congress can, with a larger majority, overrule the executive. The judicial can continue to review that. Meanwhile, as openings occur in the judicial branch, the executive branch gets to select individuals to sit in the courts in the judicial branch, and the legislative branch or the congressional branch gets to decide whether or not those persons are confirmed to those appointments. And so you can see that there's really a very intimate kind of checks and balances between the three branches, and again, the functionalists believe that this keeps power relatively even and prevents one individual or one group of individuals from getting too much power. Conflict perspective, however, looks at our political system and our economic system and sees it very differently. C. Wright Mills and William Domhoff wrote about a group they call the power elite, which essentially is the ruling class, and this is made up of the top leaders of the political landscape, as well as in corporations and military leaders as well. And so Mills and Domhoff believe that there isn't really a single decision made in government that isn't run through the power elite, basically through that ruling class. That although we may vote for leaders, our vote only has so much impact, and that really the interactions between this power elite, but among the power elite, are the things that really determine the direction of the nation. Now, this is a conflict theory, and when you read the article on the Bohemian Grove this week in this week's assignments, you'll see a little bit about how that interaction occurs and under what circumstances. And really, it's kind of eye-popping to me to realize this, and the connections that these leaders of business, industry, and politics make at the Bohemian Grove. It's just one of many different kinds of retreats that the elite, the powerful, have in this nation, and it's oftentimes not even hidden when the president goes off to meet with that group. The Clintons used to go to a meeting in Georgia every New Year's weekend, and the name of that organization is escaping me, but every year it was a gathering for people to relax together, attend conferences, and you can be sure that it was pretty much the same type of interaction and the same type of composition of the groups. Henslin takes a few moments to look at war and terrorism, and I think in terms of looking at global politics and the economy, and just what are the conditions that lead to war. And this is from a sociologist by the name of Timoshev, and he believes that there were three essential conditions. First, that there is some sort of antagonistic situation where two or more states have goals or objectives that just are incompatible. They can't coexist. And if those states have a cultural tradition of war, where war is seen as an option for dealing with these disputes with other nations, then that is something that kind of sets the stage for war to occur. And then finally, an event or a circumstance heats the antagonistic situation to a boiling point. And so, when you look back through history, there are a number of different things that have prompted war. The outbreak of World War I had to do with the assassination of a Austro-Hungarian archduke, as I recall. And Americans' involvement was the sinking of the Lusitania. American involvement in World War II had to do with, of course, Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor, the current war against some of the Muslim nations in the world really was prompted by September 11th, and so this is that fuel or event that finally pushes the antagonism beyond antagonism and into an open conflict. Henslin's also spent some time writing about the transformation of the economic systems around, and really what we're doing here is looking at the different stages of the social revolutions that we covered earlier in the semester, and kind of looking how the economy either helped create that change or how the economy was affected by the change. And in pre-industrial societies is where gender inequality began. And this is probably not too surprising to you, but the hunting and gathering societies had some very clear divisions of responsibility between males and females. And each of these other pastoral, horticultural, and agricultural societies all pretty much had the man being the individual who does the work away from the home, and and has participates in commerce with individuals from other groups, other families, other societies, other communities, whereas the women generally stayed at home and nurtured the young. And so as time goes on, these social and economic inequalities continue. As you can imagine, the men get the economic advantage, economic power through their abilities to negotiate with individuals from other groups to participate in bartering and purchasing and those kinds of things. With industrialization, the machine begins to enable us to produce things in ways that we've never been able to produce before. So surpluses develop in the production of many different products. Meanwhile, labor becomes very dependent upon owners now because the work has shifted from the home to the factories, and so instead of gathering food, let's say, or killing animals or raising food for just your own family unit, as happened in agricultural societies. Now the individuals that provide for the family actually leave the home and work for another individual instead of actually creating or killing things and bringing that food home, let's say, or growing things and bringing that food home to feed the family. Now that person gets a paycheck from another person that he works for and purchases items from someone else. And so in many respects, the entire system of say breadwinning, so to speak, in the family system changes dramatically. Some say, by the way, when we study men and masculinity, that this is one of those times when the definition of masculinity changed so much because men became dependent upon other men to be able to provide for their own families, and now that they're working for other people. And I say men dependent upon men because really, men comprise the largest majority of the workforce really up until the, into the late 1900s, I believe. More efficient machines means more products, conspicuous consumption, so that there's a lot of purchasing going on out there, and perhaps some competition between individuals to have more things than others. In the information age, in our post-industrial society, the service sector has become more prominent. That is, the pursuit of leisure becomes, as much as the gaining items and collecting material objects, having more leisure time becomes more important in this particular type of society. And so the sector that serves people who are, taking vacations and enjoying themselves and things becomes a larger group. And this sector is poorly paid, not well organized. There aren't a lot of unions that, say, for instance, organize desk clerks at the Holiday Inns or anything like this, whereas in factories unions were very strong, and so the workers actually fared better in the industrial society than they do in post-industrial societies. There's a wider variety and quantity of goods, a lot of trade among nations with this, so that the global economy becomes now a much larger factor to contend with and to consider in when you consider economics and politics. And this is an area that's very important, I think, for Americans or individuals of any nation to keep in mind, that this sense of nationalistic pride that we have in our nation has to be tempered with the notion that we really have become interdependent on a global basis, economically, politically, socially, and that to continue to advance the causes of one nation over the causes of others really works against that kind of sense of globalism. And there are individuals of a political persuasion who would tell you that teaching globalism is teaching something that's almost counter to the notion of democracy and freedom and all of this. And I certainly don't believe that. And I'm not teaching globalism, but I'm telling you about it in any event. This is a very hot topic, and a lot of people are very concerned about the notion of global economies and global governments and things like that. When you look at economic systems in the world, really there are two basic economic systems, and this is where I think it's sometimes useful to kind of step back from this and take a look at capitalism and socialism. While we see capitalism as an economic system, and we don't have any trouble understanding that, we don't see this as our political system. When we look at the economic system of socialism, we see it as a political system because we associate it with communism, and we associate it with governments, say in the Soviet Union some years ago, who seemed bent upon the elimination of capitalistic societies around the world. And when you take the politics out of this, you and view socialism as another economic system, it perhaps becomes a little more understandable why it is that the other governments in those days of the Cold War, for instance, were talking about the elimination of capitalistic societies, because from a socialist perspective, from the economic socialist perspective, the economic existence of capitalism is counterproductive to the goals of socialism, which is the distribution of goods evenly to everyone. Now, when you look at the components of these two different economic systems, capitalism has private ownership of the means of production, socialism public ownership, that is generally government ownership of the means of production, and market competition is the style, let's say, of how the decisions are made in capitalism. Whereas, in other words, the consumer, if the consumer buys a product, then the producers will make more. If the consumer doesn't buy the product is no longer produced. And so that is one of the things about capitalism that supposedly is supposed to be a strong point of it is that the consumer decides what's produced and what isn't. And so theoretically, the consumer gets what the consumer wants. There's many things that intrude on that, but that's the basic theory there. Whereas in socialism, there is a central planning, committees or whatever that decide what will be produced and in what amount and where it will be distributed, so that these goods are distributed to those in need, and there isn't too much given to anybody else. And so socialism really kind of looks at, in theory again, and I'm not saying that this is the case necessarily in the communist countries. It certainly isn't in the communist nations around the world, but the idea is, economic equality for everyone in a socialist economic system. Capitalism, profit is the ultimate goal. Socialism, the ultimate goal is the distribution of goods equally to all members without profit motive. And so perhaps if you can see socialism as an economic rather than a political system, it becomes a little easier to understand and perhaps contemplate what a socialistic system might be. Socialism is used as a very, very negative term still, and anytime the government moves forward, to implement, say, national health care or, other kinds of programs like bailouts and, those kinds of things that we've seen over the last few years, there are a lot of people on the right wing of politics that are saying, that this is creeping socialism that kind of thing. When you look at capitalism itself, there are different kinds of capitalism also. There is laissez-faire capitalism, and this is where the government isn't involved in any decision making. The market is the ruler of what goes on in a laissez-faire capitalist society. The invisible hand of the marketplace, I think, is what they were talking about in the early 1900s. You know that if you just leave everything alone, if government stays out of it, if the unions don't get in the middle of it, if self-interest is set aside, that the marketplace, the consumer will decide what's best, and everyone will be able to share and be successful. That's the theory behind pure capitalism. Practice doesn't work so well as near as we can see, at least from our own history, and so there are some versions of capitalism that vary from a laissez-faire capitalism that we'd call welfare or state capitalism, and this is probably more what we have in the United States. That there are certainly certain rights but these rights are overseen by the government. For instance, the government intervenes in the workplace and establishes certain safety regulations according to the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, or Occupational Safety and Hazards Act, OSHA anyway, where the government tracks the number of injuries on a job, and if there are too many injuries, the government may intervene and look at the safety issues in the workplace and that kind of thing. Employers are expected to give employees a safe workplace. This is something we didn't have 100 years ago. Back at the turn of the last century, when there are stories, if you ever read The Jungle, there are stories of workers falling into the vat of processed beef and things like this, and being ground up into hot dogs and those kinds of things. And I think there's probably some truth to that. There just wasn't a lot of concern about the worker safety. Likewise, we have a set number of hours that most employers have to abide by in terms of how long you can work an employee, at least without giving him or her a premium wage, time and a half or double time. So there are a number of different things where the government has intervened in the workplace and has intervened in the economy, with some controls, for instance, over Wall Street after the most recent economic downturn. So we exist in a system that is well, and I would say in addition to this, is the existence of Social Security that is some sort of guaranteed income for older employees who have worked in the system is also another indication of welfare capitalism. Whereas socialism, there has to be a central committee that runs the socialistic economic system, and it really is designed to eliminate competition. That is to say, now capitalists will tell you that competition is a good thing because it spurs us on to develop new and better products and more efficient products and more inexpensive products and those kinds of things. Again, in a pure capitalistic state, perhaps that works. Whereas a capitalist would criticize socialism, saying that the lack of competition really eliminates the production of new things and new ideas, and but socialists would tell you that by eliminating competition, prices are kept down, and goods and services are more easily accessed by the larger group of individuals. So essentially, in a socialistic society, everybody works for the government. There's a theory that says that really what's going on around the world is that the capitalist and socialist systems are adopting features from the other, and this is called convergence theory. And so there are more and more similarities shared by capitalism and socialism, and there certainly are some examples, again, in the United States alone, through the and in many societies of Europe, for instance, with unemployment compensation and retirement monies set aside by government to assure that individuals have money in their older age, universal health care systems, the Affordable Care Act, the system that is being implemented in the United States in the near future or in the present day is very, very different from medical systems in Europe. I would suggest to you that if you get an opportunity, um, take a look at the movie by Michael Moore called Sicko, which really talks about the insurance industry, the medical insurance industry in the United States, but also compares the medical healthcare systems of nations in Europe and Cuba and Canada to our own. And it's a very interesting movie and very eye-opening, I think, about what is possible out there. But in any event, um, this is some examples of socialistic model being integrated into the capitalist system in the United States. And again, a lot of the debates that you see in Congress and legislatures about where funds should be expended, the budget battles that go on between the left and the right, the executive and the congressional branches of government. Really, we're talking about, in many respects, should government help the needy, which is more of the socialist kind of a model, or should it be kind of every man for himself and all hail to capital to competition? And that's, of course, the pure capitalist idea. And China is sort of the reverse. China's got a communist government, a socialist government, and communism and socialism. Now, communism is sort of the political entity that goes into the socialist system, a socialist economic system. Although not always, but communism is sort of well, I would just have to say a bastardization of the socialist model. But nonetheless, the two of them are connected, but they're not the same thing. It's very important to keep this in mind. So China has a political system that is communistic, that leans towards socialism, and yet increasingly they are bringing in Western ideas, Western banking, Western industry, and businesses into China, and encouraging even the ordinary Chinese individuals sometimes to develop small businesses and things like this, very much on the capitalistic model. And so this is where the idea of convergence comes in. Europe, I think, has been a convergence of socialist and capitalist systems, many of those societies over there, for many, many years, and they seem to be doing fine. The productivity of workers has increased from year to year in the United States, but the inflation and cost of living has affected the value of the paycheck, and so really it's harder to get by today, even though we may be making more money. Workers are having to work longer and longer hours to get by, and have to deal with a lot of insecurities in the workplace because of plant closings and layoffs, outsourcing of jobs and by outsourcing, of course, this means corporations are sending their work overseas, closing their factories here and opening them overseas, where they can employ workers to work for much less money, and oftentimes they don't have the controls over industry, like the thing in terms of pollution emissions and minimum wage standards and working hour standards and all those things we were just talking about. In many other nations, the corporations don't have that, and so it is to their advantage, pursuing the profit motive, it is to their advantage to take those businesses and go overseas and employ people who will work for a pittance compared to what American workers will work for. And so many jobs are being outsourced. So the current recession, and why is it that the upper class can continue to move forward with the plans? They want to keep taxes low and cut entitlements to the poor and all those kinds of things. They're really not affected by the current recession, according to what the text will tell you. Here is a graphic that tells you a little bit about the change in the workforce in the United States, how since World War II there's been such a dramatic change in the number of blue-collar jobs. Blue-collar jobs being worker jobs, factory jobs, service industry, those individuals who essentially work in those kinds of areas and don't sit behind a desk basically to perform their duties. Farming, of course, has also dropped dramatically in the last 100 years, whereas the workforce has become increasingly white collar, and these individuals that work at desks and work in offices and sort of drive industry, so to speak, from their computer screens. While it might seem that working in, the increase in white collar workers might increase the overall economic level of workers, it doesn't seem to be that way. Here are the average hourly earnings of U.S. workers between 1970 and 2008 in constant and current dollars. In other words, current dollars meaning how much you're making right now, but compared to a figure that was set, I believe, let's see, 1982 is the base for the constant dollars, it says. So kind of using 1982 as the 0 point, or where a dollar equals a dollar, so to speak, you can see that the average wage of the worker has gone up very, very little in constant dollars, even though when you look at real dollars, so to speak, or I guess current dollars, you can see that it's almost tripled. But when you compare it to what the dollar buys, it really hasn't gone up at all. The wages have stagnated in the middle class. Here's another graphic that demonstrates something about income inequality in the United States. It's larger than it's been in many generations, and where you see the top 20% of the population has 50% of the nation's income. Now, this is income. This is not wealth. Remember, income and wealth, and we're going to talk about this, I think, next week, but income and wealth are two very different things, and you're going to see other figures that are even more dramatic about the top percentage of dollars in the United States compared to the percentage of population. But you can see here that the top 20% of the United States population have about half of the nation's income. The bottom 20%, an equal number at the bottom of the social ladder, has only 3% of the nation's income. So there's quite a bit of income disparity in the United States right now. And in closing this particular section, we'll talk a little bit about what's called the global superclass, and this is the leaders of the globe's top multinational companies. These companies that exist in many different nations and employ people all around the world. They're very, very powerful people. One of these corporations goes into a third world country and establishes itself in a place where they don't have a lot of controls over how they run their industry or what they pay their workers or how they work their workers. Should the local population or the government become uncomfortable, unhappy with them, and want to begin to control them, these multinational corporations can simply threaten to pack up and move. And if they do that, they throw that third world economy, the economy of that nation, into a tailspin because of the loss of income that comes from that. And so the multinational corporations can negotiate some very, very sweet deals with foreign countries and really do a lot of harm to those countries in the process of doing this. So and this is a part of that power elite that Domhoff and Mills wrote about, the corporate leaders, and so they have a lot of access to world leaders around the globe and have a lot of things to say about what goes on, not only in terms of the economy, but I would be willing to venture a guess that they have something to say about the kinds of wars that are fought and why they're fought and when and where. So that's all for this week. I want to get you started thinking about how economics and politics blend together to create power, and how that power affects the individual in a society. Next week we're going to look at socioeconomic stratification, really kind of is, I believe, the next logical step, although in the textbook it is several chapters before this. I believe that this is the next step to look at as we kind of try to understand how politics and the economy affect the individual. And so we'll be talking about socioeconomic stratification and eventually social class and poverty and deviance and crime as the rest of the semester goes along. And I think you'll see how all of these things blend together in the last several weeks. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk with you again next week. Thanks for listening.